Tonight we come to the next section of Pilgrim's Progress, a part of the chapter, you'll notice at the beginning, the chapter which is called False Teachings and Doubts. So we're starting into this new chapter, and the first section of this new chapter is entitled Mr. By-Ends. This will be page 32. Mr. By-Ends. We remember, as we closed our time last year, that Christian had escaped from Vanity Fair with a friend that he had made in that place by the name of Hopeful, someone who had watched he and Faithful in that place and had come to faith in the Lord of both Christian and Faithful. And so now he and Christian escaped from Vanity Fair. Faithful, of course, you remember, was martyred there for his unwillingness to capitulate to the thinking patterns of the city of Vanity Fair, and they executed him for it. And you remember that Bunyan is in this great allegory is using names as a way of identifying different things that we need to think about in terms of this walk of Christianity that we are taking. He's writing, of course, to believers, and he's writing to them to say, this is what it means to walk from the city of destruction to the celestial city. This is what it means to walk into the presence of Christ. This is what it means to walk the path of holiness, to walk the path of sanctification, to live the Christian life as Christ would have us to live it. And these are the kinds of things you're going to run into along the way. And he uses names of people and places to reveal, if you will, through this metaphor, what he wants us to be aware of as we are going. And so we come tonight to another set of things that Bunyan wants us to be aware of and to think about and to consider as we are going. As I said, he uses names to do this, and this section is actually entitled by the name of the primary character in it, Mr. By-Ends. Now, the problem that you have so often with an allegory is you have to kind of read through it and then back up and see what it says, all right? So it doesn't always work where you can start just by reading something and make a comment on it, read some more, make a comment on it, because it almost seems as though you, in some sections you have to read so far into it that by that point you've forgotten many of the details that come before it. So what I want to do with you, since I'm teaching this thing to you, is I want to actually flip that over and tell you up front what is being said here and then work our way backwards through the details by going forward through it, okay? So I want to start with the obvious, which is, all right, what does this name By-Ends mean? Okay, what does this mean? Now, you are familiar, of course, with the old adage that is sometimes used that the ends justify the means, right? And we know that adage to mean, if you will, that under some circumstances it is believed that it doesn't matter how you get to a certain place as long as you get to that certain place. If the goal is X, then it really doesn't matter what all of the various means are to get to that. Okay, now sometimes that's true, yes, it doesn't really matter how you get there, any means justifies the ends. But very often the adage is a pejorative. It's, yeah, no, not all means justify this particular end. Okay, and that's where Bunyan is going. Okay, in this case, the means do not, in fact, justify the ends, but this is a man who thinks they do. Okay, this is a man who thinks they do. So his name is sort of a play on words, if you will. He's all about the ends, however he gets there, by whatever means he gets to these ends, all right? All right, so in general, that's the definition of this man. Now, as I said, as we go through the section now, you'll see that. It'll become more and more obvious as we read through the section. But let me step one step further into this and suggest to you that this is a man who has two truths about him. You know, there's a reality if you have a coin, that a coin has two sides. There's no such thing as a one-sided coin, right? It has to have two sides. And every coin has a heads and every coin has a tails. There isn't two heads, there isn't two tails, there's two different sides. To make a coin, you have to have both. All right, so this man is a man with two sides. And by the way, as you listen to me over the course of the night, you will find what I just said to be extraordinarily ironical, all right? Here is a man who believes, there's two things true about him. Number one, he believes that you can use the Christian religion to accomplish what goal that you want. That you can use the Christian religion to accomplish the goal that you would want. Now, we'll find out what his goal is in a bit, all right? But the first side of this coin is he's a man who thinks that the Christian religion is something that can be used to accomplish an end. Okay, he's Mr. By ends. For him, the means is the Christian religion, okay? But the other side of the coin is that this Christian religion that he embraces is one that must not run contrary to what the world thinks is good. Okay? Because ultimately the ends that he has in mind is his own comfort, his own prosperity, his own happiness, okay? Whatever word you want to substitute in there. His own financial gain, his own power and prestige and position, whatever you want to insert in there doesn't matter. The ends are those kinds of things. It's all about him. And the Christian religion is for this man all about getting to that end. We're going to use even the Christian religion to get to the point of my happiness, my comfort, my prosperity. But, flipping the coin over, the Christian religion that I use can't be a Christian religion that's not embraced by the majority of people, because that wouldn't work, would it? Because you see, if the goal is my own personal happiness and prosperity, I certainly can't embrace a Christianity that the world doesn't like, because guess what? That's not going to make me happy. So he is a man who has these two sides at the same time. He believes that Christianity can be useful to him in attaining his personal goals, but only a Christianity that is acceptable and pleasing to the world. Now, with that in mind, you will notice that in this section there's only one biblical reference, and it's very late in the section. In fact, it's Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, in basically the third from the last paragraph. But it's not the key verse of the passage. That's a biblical reference, I think, is just designed to deal with the particular sentence that's being made there. I suspect that Bunyan had 2 Timothy 4 in mind when he wrote this section. And I think he had that because as he looked around in his day, and he looked at the state of the Christian church in his day, what he saw was what Paul speaks about in 2 Timothy 4. Now, these are verses you're very familiar with, but let me read them with emphasis, okay? Paul says to Timothy, I charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing in his kingdom, preach the word. That's what he says. He says, I'm standing in front of you, Timothy. I'm standing in the presence of God. I'm standing in front of the one who's going to come and judge the living and the dead, who's going to establish his kingdom. I'm coming and I'm saying to you, on his authority, here's what I want you to do. Preach the word. All right. You want to talk about an imperative. All right. This isn't a suggestion by any stretch of the imagination. This is Paul pointing his finger at Timothy and saying, listen to me. This is the most important thing I'm ever going to tell you to do. In the very presence of God himself, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. When it's popular, when it's unpopular. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. That word complete there could actually be rendered as with all patience or with everlasting patience. Stand before your people and preach this word to them and continue to preach to them even when they frustrate the dog out of you because they don't seem to be getting what you're saying. Okay? Be patient with them. Let the Spirit use this preaching over the long term to change them. Okay, see it? Now, the natural question is why? Why would Paul stand in front of Timothy and say, do this? And the answer comes immediately next when he says, for the time is coming when people, I think that's better translated, men, as in the King James, when men will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. They will surround themselves with men that will tell them what they want to hear, and only what they want to hear, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths, into untruths, into fantastical stories that don't and are not consistent with the Christian gospel. All right, I think that those words are ringing in the ears of Bunyan when he writes this section. And I think you'll hear it as we start reading it, as I start going through and discussing the various elements of this, okay? Now, let me remind you that what we have here is you and I are reading a book written by a man who is writing about a man who is having a vision about a man. Okay? Okay. We're reading a book by another man who's writing a book about a man who's had a vision about a man. All right? So here's what the man in the vision in the book says. So I saw that. Okay, so in other words, the man who's having the vision sees Christian and others. So I saw that quickly after they were got out of the fair, that is, Christian and Hopeful were got out of Vanity Fair, when they escaped from Vanity Fair, they overtook one that was going before them, whose name was By-Ends. Okay, so we're introduced to the man at the center of this section. Christian and Hopeful are going along the path, and as they're walking out of Vanity Fair, probably running out of Vanity Fair, they're running down the path and they encounter this man, By-Ends, who is on the path to the celestial city. All right, that's important. He, that is Mr. By-Ends, told them that he came from the town of Fair Speech, and he was going to the celestial city, but told them not his name. Okay, now, don't ignore that little parenthesis, okay? You're going to see why in a little bit, why it is that Bunyan so distinctly puts that in this story. He comes up to them, and when they come up to him, he tells them that he is from the city of Fair Speech, and he is on his way to the celestial city. Okay, so he's coming from a city by the name of Fair Speech, and he is on his way, supposedly, to the celestial city. So what we can conclude is that he's coming out of a city that has a name that describes itself, and he is supposedly traveling on his way to the celestial city. And remember, not everybody that's on this celestial path is actually going to the celestial city, but this man is claiming that that's where he's going. Okay, so he's claiming to be a follower of Christ. Okay, all right. Now, what is this town of Fair Speech? What is Fair Speech? Well, you will discover the character of the city by virtue of the people that are about to be introduced by Mr. By-Ends. But before we go there, let me just give you up front what this is. What is Fair Speech? The city of Fair Speech is a place where you can go, and when other people talk to you, you will never be offended. You can go to this place, and no one will ever contradict what you believe. This is a place where you can go, and you will never be offended by what's spoken in the city. No matter what your position on a particular topic might be, the speech that comes out of the mouth of the people in the city will never offend you. Okay? Now, like I said at the outset, I have to tell you that stuff up front so that as we get into the individual parts of it, you begin to see that it's true. Okay? In other words, I've read ahead for you All right? All right, so this is the place he's come from. And we'll discover that that is exactly what it is that this place is about. So Christian asks, pray, who are your kindred there, if a man may be so bold? If I might be so bold, Christian says, tell me who your friends are. Who are your acquaintances in that place? Now, you know why Christian asked this question. Christian asked this question because a man is known by the company that he keeps. And so Christian says, well, I really want to know who you are. And the way to find that out is to discover who you travel with. Who are your friends? Where did you come from? Okay? So tell me who your friends are. And Mr. Bayan says, almost the whole town. I know everybody in town, and everybody knows me. Because you see, and I will add this on Bayan's lips, everybody in Fair Speech gets along, you see. Everybody in Fair Speech gets along, you see. We are from this town, the whole town. And there's a few particular individuals who demonstrate the nature of this town. Now, at this point, again, I have to insert a comment here to help you understand what we're going to be talking about here. Because when you start reading this list of the names, you're going to be going, okay, what are these? Who are these guys? Okay. What we're talking about here, when we talk about a city where you can go and never be offended, what we're really talking about is a place that is extraordinarily ecumenical in nature. Now, are you familiar with this word, ecumenical? It's a word that means all kinds of religions mixed together. Ecumenism is this religion and this religion and this religion all just kind of getting along with each other. We try to find common ground with each other. There have been ecumenical movements that have taken place in the church for centuries, have been going on, trying to build bridges, if you will, between the different religions. The World Council of Churches, you remember them? Some of you old enough to remember the World Council of Churches. World Council of Churches was established in order to do just that, to bring together all the major religions of the world into one big tent, to try to bring Christianity and Judaism and Islam together in one big tent and try to just get everybody to, as it says on the back of those Volvos that you see driving on the road, that they might all coexist. Right? That's ecumenism. Sorry if you own a Volvo. Didn't mean to pick on you. Okay, a Subaru. All right, whatever. Definitely Subaru. Okay, there we go. Subarus. All right. I have a brother-in-law that sells Subarus, but he is not one of them. Okay, anyways, off the subject. Ecumenism is this idea of trying to bring together all of the various positions. But what do you have to do in order to bring together all these disparate ways of thinking? You have to water them all down to the point that they really have no substance left to them. There was an ecumenical movement between Roman Catholics and Protestants that occurred back in I think it was in the 90s. Timothy George up at Samford, tried to start this Catholics and Protestants together thing that was trying to get Catholics and Protestants together. And what happened was they came together. Except that the Protestants had to decide to abandon justification by faith alone in order for the ecumenism to be a part of the system. It's got to be watered down. How do you bring together such disparate worldviews? Well, that's what Fair Speech is as a town. It is a town where, well, quite literally, the whole place is one giant ecumenism. And the reason that you're never offended in there is because there is no conviction anywhere in the town. There's no conviction. There's no foundation. There's no fundamentals. There's no core tenets. It's all just wishy-washy. And when you live in the town, you embrace the ecumenism, and nobody's offended by anything. Now, I'll show you that I'm right on this, as you can see, from the men that he's about to describe. And he gives us their names. He says, and in particular, my Lord Turnabout. Lord Turnabout, a man facing that way, and then all of a sudden facing that way, and then facing that way, and then facing that way. He doesn't have a position. He faces that way sometimes, he faces that way sometimes. His beliefs go that way sometimes, his beliefs go that way sometimes. Additionally, we have my Lord Time Server. Now, I must confess, I struggled with that one for a while, trying to figure, okay, what is that? Okay. One of the key elements of an ecumenistic religion would probably be, since it's not based on any serious convictions of any kind, that the practice of religion in that place would be simply nothing more than serving time. It would go something like this. Well, I went to church this week, got that taken care of, served my time. When I was growing up as a Catholic boy, I can tell you this. My favorite weekends were when my parents decided that they were going to go to Mass on Saturday night. And the reason was because you got it out of the way. 5 o'clock Saturday, you marched down to the church, you survived for an hour. That's how I would put it. You survived for an hour, and then you had the whole night, and then the next day you didn't have to get up to go to church. You could sleep in, as a typical teenager would be wont to do, and enjoy the whole day. Time served. Right? That's a hallmark of a religion with no convictions. I don't go to church because there's something I want to go there to believe. I go just to serve time. Or how about Mr. Smooth Man? Mr. Smooth Man. Now, I don't wish to offend if you happen to be in the automobile industry, but this reminds me of the used car salesman who can walk up to you on the lot and by his words convince you that this rusted out rust bucket with 175,000 miles on it is the car you want and the car you need to drive. He is smooth. He's got a way of talking. You know, it's kind of like the devil walking up to Eve. You know, you'll notice in that account, Moses doesn't tell us that Eve was scared by what she heard. She didn't walk away. She continued the conversation. He was smooth. And that is a key feature of this ecumenism. Look, it doesn't matter what you believe. Come and be a part of us. We're all wonderful people here, you see. It doesn't matter what you, there's no convictions. We don't need any convictions. Come on, join our team. It's the hallmark of ecumenism, isn't it? Or how about Mr. Facing Both Ways? Okay, Mr. Turnabout sometimes face that way, sometimes face this way. But Mr. Facing Both Ways faces both ways at the same time. I mean, he's literally two-faced because he's facing both ways simultaneously. Look, I think this guy basically represents the reality of the human condition as a result of the fall. I would call it a condition of the flesh, in which somehow we are able, as human beings, to believe at the same time two absolutely contradictory things. Our synergist friends, this can be used on. You go to them and you show them their contradictions. You show them such inconsistencies. So you say that God is sovereign over every things, right? Oh yes, Jesus is Lord. He is sovereign over all things. He is in charge of all that comes to pass. Really? So what you're telling me then, my dear synergist friend, is that the destiny of men then is in God's hands, right? Oh, no. The destiny of men is in men's hands. It's up to them to make a choice for God. They must come to him. They must believe in. Well, I'm confused, Mr. Synergist. Which is it? Is God sovereign or is man sovereign? And Mr. Synergist, if he's really being honest, will say, well, it's both. But that's two contradictory ideas being held in the mind at the same time. Or, let me put it like this. Well, you know what? I'm a Christian, but I'm also a homosexual. Those are two absolutely contradictory ideas. They are. They're absolutely contradictory. I read an article this week about a woman who is a former lesbian. And she came out of lesbianism because a man actually had the temerity to preach the gospel to her and told her that to be a Christian meant that you put behind you the old life, you repented, and you came to Christ and you put aside those old ways. And she came out of that. But her alma mater was Biola University. And Biola is struggling as a Christian university, trying to deal with this reality of the LGBTQ community in its campus. What do we do with these people? I mean, after all, we want to be loving and affirming and caring for them and loving of them and so forth. We want to help them. And her argument, boiled down in the article that she wrote, was all of the students on campus are deeply confused about these things because Biola won't take a stand on one side or the other. They won't decide to be Christian, and they won't decide to be all in on the LGBTQ thing. They want to have one foot in this world, one foot in this world. And all the students are utterly confused because they're like, well, which way is it? That's Mr. Two-Faced. That's going both directions, holding two opposing views simultaneously. But listen, that's the hallmark of ecumenism. That's the hallmark of ecumenism. And one last man is, well, frankly, Mr. Anything. Because you see, Mr. Turnabout sometimes faced that way and sometimes faced that way. And Mr. Two-Faced faced that way and that way simultaneously. But Mr. Anything faced every direction imaginable at any given point in time. So he is the consummate picture of someone with no convictions. I'll just believe anything that comes along. You see it? This is the city of fair speech, described by the people that this man is talking about. But there's one more, and I love this one. And you'll see why. And the parson of our parish, okay, if you're not familiar with parson, parson is an old English word for pastor, okay? An old English word for the leader of the church in a particular place. A parish is a word we don't use anymore in Catholic circles because it was generally geographical in nature. This is the parish that this church supports. But we would substitute in words like congregation, church family, that sort of thing, right? So this guy is the pastor of a congregation in that particular place. And his name is Mr. Two Tongues. He doesn't have two faces, he has two tongues. Because what's his primary role? To preach, to speak. But what does he do? He speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He says one thing to one group of people that they want to hear, and then he speaks something else to another group of people that they want to hear. He is the picture of the kind of preacher, if I might just insert my own personal opinion here for a moment, the kind of preacher that I really cannot stand. And that is the preacher who equivocates when he stands in the pulpit. Well, nobody really knows what this is meaning. See, this guy has this opinion and this guy has this opinion and we don't really know. So I'm just going to tell you all the different positions and then I'm going to step back and let you decide one for yourself. In other words, a jellyfish for a pastor with no spine, just equivocates. Now, I realize, I speak from experience. Yes, when you stand in a pulpit and you state conviction, you declare something to be true, people are going to call you arrogant. They're going to label you as hard-headed and hard-hearted. They're going to say that you have no love for people because you just won't listen to anybody else's positions. But I don't think any of us would dare call Jesus a spineless jellyfish. And yet he loved men more than anyone else ever has. This particular parson is two-tongued, which is why there's no conviction in the town. Because the guy that's supposed to be bringing Christian conviction to the people of the town cannot and will not, because he's two-tongued. And this parson of our parish, Mr. Two-Tongues, was my mother's own brother by father's side. Now, I had to stop and think about that for a minute. Like, okay, what? Okay, so he is my mother's brother. That makes him my uncle. But he's my uncle on the father's side. And the only conclusion that I could come to was Bunyan's describing a case where his mother and his uncle are half brothers and sisters, sharing the same father, but not the same mother. Okay? Now, why in the world would Bunyan put that in there like that? What's the point of that? Well, I do think what he's saying is, if I might be so bold, and I haven't found any commentary of any kind to describe this, but here's what I think. I think he puts it in here. It's like, do you know who I am? My uncle is the pastor of the town. That's how important I am in the town. Now, it's true. It's true. He's only my half uncle by virtue of, his relationship to his family tree up the line. But nonetheless, it's almost as though Bunyan writes in here the idea that so much of Christianity in his day was nepotic. It was all based on nepotism. You're Christian because you either knew somebody who was or you were born into it. Now look, for those of us who grew up Catholic, how did we get started with it? We were born into it. Very few proselytes to Catholicism. Most of them are born into it. Oh, and that's true in Lutheranism in Germany, by the way. And that's true in English Puritan Christianity in Bunyan's day. Christianity in Bunyan's day, which was dominant in England, right? In the 17th century, the vast majority of people who were there could only claim to be Christian, not on the basis of genuine faith in Christ, but primarily on the basis of who they knew. Mother, uncle, whatever. And it was particularly valuable if you actually had a family member in the ministry, which I suspect Bunyan is tongue-in-cheek putting this in there like that. I used to be a pastor too. I'm in prison now. But people used to think I was something because I was a pastor, because I was a parson of the local parish. It's all part of the picture that he's painting of this city. What's the convictions of this city? Well, nothing other than your relationship to other people that you happen to have in the community, but it doesn't really have any substance. It's ecumenism at its worst. And my wife is a very virtuous woman. She's the daughter of a virtuous woman. See it? There it again. Notice the relationship. Why is his wife virtuous? Well, because his mother-in-law is virtuous. Not because she's virtuous, but because the mother-in-law is virtuous. It's all about who you know. It's all about your relationships on a human level. And she is my lady Faining's daughter. So the mother-in-law's name is Faining. Now, this word feigning is one of those English words that we don't use very much anymore. I actually went and looked it up because I want to make sure I got the right definition. Feigning is a word that means to be pretended to be affected by. I feign ignorance, which means, well, I actually do know what you're talking about, but I pretend like I don't. Okay, that's to feign ignorance. So feigning is to pretend. But the more archaic definition of the word is to invent or indulge in pretense. So she feigns something. What does she feign? She feigns being a Christian. She feigns knowing the Lord, true religion, whatever words you want to use. She feigns it. She doesn't actually believe it. Now, from Mr. Bunyan's perspective, he thinks that's a virtue. We, of course, from Bunyan's perspective, know, this is an indictment. Her name is actually indicting her. And she comes from a very honorable family. Okay, so it's all about who you know and all about the least common denominator version of religion that you can find, a place where you can go, believe whatever you want to believe, go into the town, and nobody's ever going to offend you by what they say because they're never going to push back on your beliefs. Because Mr. Two-Faced and Two-Tongued and anything are going to believe, well, anything you want to believe, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Now, how many of you have at this point made the connection to what I read out of 2 Timothy 4? Is this not exactly what Paul warns of? That there's going to come a day when there will be whole swaths of people who call themselves Christian who have no convictions about Christianity at all. James White is famous for saying that the reason why most people are Protestant is because they've never sat down to think about the difference between being a Protestant and being a Catholic. They have no idea. And that's what Paul was warning against, and that's what Bunyan is painting. It is a picture of a Christianity that has no substance to it. But Mr. Byans now tips his hand about the real problem with this form of Christianity when he says the following. "'Tis true, we somewhat differ in religion from those of the stricter sort." Okay, see where he's going here? Who are the stricter sort? Well, those are the people who actually hold convictions. Those would be what we would call the orthodox, those who are willing to actually stand on principle. We disagree with them, but only in two small ways. Two small ways? Only in two small ways. One, first, we never strive against wind and tide. And secondly, we are always most zealous when religion goes in his silver slippers. Now you read that and go, what? Okay. Wind and tide. Which way the wind blows, which way the tide is going, is an imagery of how the world thinks. Because it's never fixed. It's always changing. What was true yesterday is no longer true today. What was true 50 years ago has been completely lost even in our society today. We're getting to the point now where on broadcast TV, they don't even bother to bleep out the dirty words anymore. That's all been swept away, right? We don't need that anymore. That's the wind and the tide. Okay, so what he's saying is the kind of religion, Christianity, that we hold to is one that never pushes back against whichever way the wind is blowing. We never push back against that. You know, for 2,000 years, the Christian church has believed that marriage is between one man and one woman. But now the cultural tide is, well, you know, two men could get married or two women could get married. So what Mr. Byans would say is, well, we're not going to push back against traditional marriage. Nope. We're just going to say, well, you know what? That's the way things are. God must have it in that way. That's the way God has it. So we're just going to go ahead and say, that's good. We're not going to push back against wind and tide. Whatever the way the world is going, that's the way our Christianity is going to go. And then the second, which is much harder, but it's not much harder when you read the rest of it, when it says, we love much to walk with him in the street at the sun shines, and the people applaud it. Meaning, the religion that we embrace must be popular. We only embrace that which is popular. Only that which is acceptable to people all around, you see. It's easy to be a Christian when the rest of the culture is Christian. When the rest of the culture is not Christian, we don't really need it. We don't really need it. You know, it was good back in the 50s and 60s, that's fine. But, you know, we're way past that point. We don't need it anymore. I wonder in the span of my own life, which is 65 years now, how many people were consistent, regular church goers back when I was a child who today have zero interest in the church? Because the tide has changed. And it's only profitable to be a Christian, well, you know, when it's popular, when it's acceptable, when everybody's a Christian. Now, you will notice that Bunyan is painting this in his day. That's 500 years ago. But if Bunyan could walk forward to today and sit down here, after having read the newspaper this morning, he would probably go, man, was I a prophet? Because this is an indictment of the modern Western church. This is it. This is it. This is the cultural Christianity that has now been swept away by the secular tide all around it. And the last vestiges of Christianity, quote unquote, that are being embraced, so much of it, simply turning with the tide and with the wind to whatever the culture now says is good. You know, the Biola example that I gave you just a minute ago. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. The culture says we have to love gay people and affirm them in their gaiety. But the gospel says, no, we must call them to repent and turn from wickedness and be sanctified. Those are two very distinct things, very different things. And so Biola seems to have embraced this ecumenism between these two things. Well, let's try to navigate a world where we affirm the homosexual, but at the same time embrace Orthodox Christianity. Can't be done. Cannot be done. But this is who Mr. By-Ends is. And let's add one more point before we leave it. And we'll see this very clearly in the next section. Not in this one, but in the next. I'll give you a preview. Mr. By-Ends uses this ecumenical, watered-down, convictionless Christianity to further his own ends. He uses it to advance his own prosperity. If you look at the bottom of page 33, it says, the men's names were Hold the World, Money Love, Save All, men that Mr. By-Ends had formerly been acquainted with. For in their youth, they were schoolfellows in the town of Lovegain and were taught the art of getting, either by fraud, flattery, lying, or by putting on a guise of religion. See it? This is a man who holds no real convictions, but he uses Christianity to get what he wants. Deb and I, when we were going to a very large megachurch in Birmingham in the 90s, we knew a man there who stopped coming to the church because he had run out of business contacts in that place. There was nobody left that he could sell to anymore. And so he left. He's Mr. By-Ends. He's exactly the man. He had no convictions of Christ whatsoever. The church to him was nothing more than a way of gain. Then Christian stepped a little aside to his fellow hopeful, saying, it runs in my mind that this is one By-Ends of fair speech. I know who this guy is. And if it be he, we have as very a knave in our company as dwells in all these parts. We have one of the best representatives of this city imaginable right in front of us. Okay? Then said hopeful, ask him. Methinks he should not be ashamed of his name. So Christian came up with him again and said, sir, is not your name By-Ends of fair speech? And here's By-Ends' response. That is my nickname, because I had always the luck to jump in my judgment with the way of the times. That is my nickname. Or that's what people call me. Because I was deft at jumping into things at just the right time. I knew when to get into the stock market. I knew when to get out. I knew when to use this and that and then dispose of this and that in order to advance my cause. Notice, this is a man who doesn't even have the convictions to tell his own name. That's the point that Bunyan made by putting the parenthesis up in the very first paragraph, but it told them not his name. He didn't even have the spine to tell these men who he was, because everything has to be hedged. You never know what might be useful. Don't give them more, because they might use it against you. Hold back. Take the path that leads to your best life now. Sorry, that title is just so perfect for this, right? So, Christian says, what's your name? And this guy won't even tell us his name. That is an indication of who he is. He's a man with no convictions. He's got no substance whatsoever. So Christian says, I thought indeed that you were the man that I had heard of, and to tell you what I think, I fear this name belongs to you more properly than you are willing we should think it doth. Okay, we know who you are. You may not want to say the name, but we know who you are. We have figured it out. So Bians replies, well, if you will thus imagine, I cannot help it. You shall find me a fair company keeper if you will admit me your associate. Don't worry about that. Just let me go with you. Okay? It's okay. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. Again, he's acting out his character perfectly. I will go with you on this journey called Christianity, on this walk to the celestial city. I'll be a good accompaniment for you. Now, how do you think Christian would respond to that? Well, here's what he says. If you go with us, you must go against wind and tide, the which I perceive is against your opinion. In other words, you're not willing to go against the wind and the tide, but to go with us, you're going to have to go against the wind and the tide. You're going to have to actually have some convictions. You're actually going to have to stand on some principles. You're actually going to have to believe something. You must also own religion in his rags as well as when in his silver slippers. In other words, you're going to have to embrace this in season and out of season. And stand by him, too, when bound in irons, as well as when he walks the streets with applause. When Christianity is popular, great. You need to join it. But when it's unpopular, to the point that you get put in irons, as Faithful had been, as Christian himself had been, you still need to follow. Well, guess what? That takes conviction. And Bian's reply is, you must not impose nor lord it over my faith. Leave me to my liberty and let me go with you. Or, to say it in more common, modern language, well, you just go your way, I'll go mine. You believe what you want to believe, I'll believe what I want to believe. And it's interesting that there's a reference here to Galatians 5. My time is short, but I think I can make sense of why this is here, because at first glance, it doesn't look like it. But here's the phrase in Galatians 5:12. Okay, I love this. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Look, the whole paragraph above it is about those who had come to town who were trying to convince the Galatians that in order to be a true Christian, you also had to be circumcised. And Paul says, fine. If that's the religion that you want, then don't just circumcise. Okay? All adults in the room, we understand what we're talking about, right? Just go ahead and finish the job. Well, that's the idea. Mr. Bian says, look, I don't need to hold any convictions to walk with you. We can walk. You can go your way, I'll go mine. You have your opinion, I'll have mine. You have your truths, I'll have my truths, which is an utterly preposterous statement, but it's very popular in our day, is it not? And what Bunyan is saying by virtue of the insertion of Galatians 5:13 is, no, it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. You are not going to be able to walk this Christian walk with faithful believers unless you hold true biblical convictions. You cannot waver. That's what Paul means in this. Look, you can't have it both ways. Just go ahead and cut the whole thing off. You'd be better off. Then said Bai-Ens, I shall never desert my old principles, since they are harmless and profitable. Haven't hurt anybody, not hurting anybody, not hurting you. I'll believe what I want to believe. If I may not go with you, I must go by myself until some overtake me that will be glad of my company. I'll just wait here until others like me come along, because I'm not going to go with you. And it reminds me of Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, verse 17, which, of course, famous passage, you know. Luke 14, 17. Nope, not the passage in question. I wrote the wrong reference. The passage that I was looking for was, if you wish to be my disciple, you must take up your cross daily and follow me. That's to walk the path of execution. That's to walk the path of Calvary. Walk the road out to Calvary and be crucified. It's no longer about you. It's about him. And that's the primary conviction that we must hold. That it's about Christ and not about us. 27. I wrote 17. Thank you. 27. Luke 14, 27. Bottom line is, the Christian church must be a place that stands for something. Otherwise, as wise men once said, it will fall for anything. Well, here we are. I can't speak for the other elders of Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, although I think they would agree with me when I say the following. We, as a church, are built upon convictions, principles, doctrinal truths, and we will not negotiate them, and we will not let the winds and the tides blow us. We will not change our positions. Fact of the matter is, you come in this church, you're going to discover pretty quickly that we believe certain things to be true. We have a doctrinal statement on our website, unlike 99% of the churches out there. And if you read ours, which will take you, by the way, a couple of hours to actually read through the thing, we have our convictions laid out. This is what we teach. This is what we believe. The reason why the Christian church is as worthless as it is in our day is because it has lost its convictions. It's not teaching the truth anymore. Instead, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help Mr. Bai-Ens reach his goal. Walk into the typical church, and it's all about your happiness. The Christian religion that we preach and teach to you is all about your happiness. Well, not here, because it isn't about happiness. It's about holiness. It's about Christ-likeness. It's about him as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And either we hold some convictions or we fall into this. This is a warning. Either we hold some convictions, we preach the word and rebuke and exhort and encourage with all patience to get our people to understand the truth, or they're going to become like this. Because this is what men become when they have no convictions. So, you can call me arrogant if you want to, but I'm going to stand on convictions that come from Scripture and try to teach them to you, that you might stand on them as well, so that we don't become jellyfish. Now, more of Mr. Bai-Ens will appear in the next section. You get the impression, don't you, that Bunyan thought this was a big problem in his day? Mr. Bunyan, you have no idea how big of a problem it is until you fast forward to our day. But we'll learn more about him next week, Lord willing.